I think the thing that's unfortunate, and I don't know that it's a blame game, it's really not, is that when I get clients who have already been sentenced or already taken a plea and are inside, and there were things that could have been done in the sentencing or potentially negotiated that would have opened them up to other programming or potentially temporary release. These are negotiated pleas. There are times judges want to actually help the individual. I've seen it. And so I think a big part of what I'm able to do is educate the attorneys.
Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing. Hey everybody, it's Doug Passon coming to you from Studio 3553 in Scottsdale, Arizona. Up until this point, the podcast has certainly had a bent towards the federal sentencing process, but there are like 1 million cases every year that are set for sentencing, so it's so important to look beyond federal to how some states handle their criminal matters. So today, we are going to New York, helping us get set for sentencing, a gentleman and a scholar, literally, Craig Rothfeld. Welcome, sir. How are you?
I'm well, Doug. Thank you. Thank you for asking. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Good to have you. So let me tell my folks a little bit more about you before we dig in. Craig Rothfeld is the founder of a company called Inside Outside Limited. That's insideoutsidelimited.com. He's a criminologist, a criminal justice advisor, an advocate with a postgraduate certification, and he's a candidate right now for an MA in criminal justice. So Craig you're probably the second one of their kind that I've had on the podcast. You're essentially, I guess, for lack of a better word, I don't know if you'd call yourself this, but a prison consultant. But truthfully, Craig, he represents individuals who are incarcerated within the state of New York. He does do some federal BOP consulting and various other state departments of corrections. And he works with other people and their families that are either on parole or recently released from prison and reintegrating into society and those types of things. So he advises, he advocates for people, their families, and their legal defense teams on pre and post criminal sentencing mitigation strategies and life during incarceration. I just plagiarized all that from your bio, so you probably could have told us that better, but that's just a general overview. So we are going basically back into the world of prison consultant, but really we're going to dig deep into the way things happen in New York, because I think it's just super interesting. Putting the prison consulting stuff aside for a second, I mean, we'll definitely go there. I did a podcast a while back with an English professor who's an expert in criminal justice in England. And all we did was talk about, well, this is the way things work over there. And it was super fascinating to compare. Okay, what do you think about this? How does this compare to what we do here? And I think we can have that discussion because state is a world away from federal. And I think you're going to tell us a lot about the differences and the similarities and what they do worse and what maybe they're doing better in your state. So we've got a lot to talk about. I'm going to stop talking so I can let you talk. What I love to do in this podcast, storytelling is everything in the law. So I like origin stories. I'd love for you. I think that's a good place, a very fine place to start with your origin story. How did you get down this road of the work that you're doing?
Sounds good. You read my bio very well. Thank you.
I'm a good reader. They taught us they did teach us in law school. They taught us how to read very well. All right.
Yeah, and by the way, and you brought this up. You're right. I am a prison consultant. People ask me all the time, "What do you do for a living?" And I say I'm a criminologist. Which, if I just stop there, everybody says, "Wow, that's fascinating. What is that?" So I don't pause. I just say I'm a criminologist, and I have chosen to focus on the prison system and incarceration, and I run a prison consulting practice for individuals and their families. The I guess the story of how I got here, I grew up on Long Island, which is just I guess outside New York City proper, where I live now. I live in Manhattan. I've lived here for over half my life. Grew up in the suburbs. I went to undergraduate school in upstate New York at the State University of New York at Albany. Had a wonderful experience there. I had always planned on being a lawyer, and I just made some different choices when I was there. I actually had gone there, believe it or not, to be a criminal justice major. They had a very, very good criminal justice program. And when I got there, I decided to get an accounting degree, which I thought was always good of an attorney who knows accounting. And I was going to go to law school right from undergrad, and I wound up getting a job with a public accounting firm that's no longer around, Arthur Andersen. And then I said, okay, you know what? I'll go to law school at night. And I had taken the LSATs, and one thing leads to another, and I never got to law school. So I spent I spent time in public accounting, spent a lot of time in various finance roles, and then in 2002, I joined my former partner, which I guess is going to be the backbone of how I got here, to build and run and eventually lose a financial services company. In brevity, we built a firm that at its peak had 126 people. We did a lot of really good things, and I made, several horrible decisions and horrible choices. I'm always careful to say they weren't mistakes. We had other options. And, as a result of that, we shut the business down after 10 years at the end of 2011. And that really is where, January 2012, this journey, I guess, began. I was barred from the financial services industry, made a decision to rebuild my life in another industry. And 26 months later, which is what everyone might be waiting to hear, the first point in this real pivot, in February 2014, I was indicted by the Manhattan District Attorney, which is highly unusual for white-collar crimes. They're usually prosecuted, as you have alluded to, in the federal world. I can't speak to why the feds did or didn't take the case. I just was told by my lawyers they passed on it, but the Manhattan District Attorney did not. Wow. I kind of use that as the big demarcation point when I explain to people how I've been involved in the criminal justice system. It's now 9 years. I spent 22 months defending myself. I spent 18 months in prison. That was 40 intense months of everything about the New York State Department of Corrections. And obviously, feel free to, cut me off if you want. Yeah. As a matter of fact, this right here, which I can point to, all came home with me. So I used my time very wisely, thinking I was going to write a book. I had no, it was, this wasn't necessarily on my mind, but, 22 months getting ready to go to prison, learning everything I can, 18 months learning everything I can in there, researching, going to the law library, interviewing other inmates. I mean, I was entrenched in it and advocating for myself as well. And wow. I got out, and the short version is a mentor of mine who you may know, who does federal prison consulting, Joel Sickler, and my former criminal defense attorney, who I feel like in a lot of ways I owe my life to, Mark Ignifilo, told me that they thought I could build a New York State practice. There was a real void. No one was doing it. There are federal specialists. There used to be someone who did the state. He sadly passed away several years ago. And they said, we're going to start referring you clients, and let's see where it goes. And then that's what led me back to grad school. That's what led me to get the postgraduate certification in criminal sentencing and sentencing advocacy, and extended it into my master's. So, that's kind of the 9-year arc. I currently have over 70 clients that are incarcerated. As you said, the super majority of them are in New York State and or New York City and or on their way into New York State prison. And I've had many, 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 thankfully, that have already been released. So I hope that that's kind of the arcing story you were looking for. Yeah. And how I arrived at this spot.
What was it like rebuilding your life after going to prison?
It's a really good question. So, for better or for worse, sometimes people's greatest strength or really good strength, it can be a greatest weakness or, right up there. And, when I get knocked down, I get up. And so, for a long time, and when I was young, there was this feeling that you could will yourself to do anything and, you can take it all on your shoulders and do it. And I have that same mindset. I had that same mental fortitude when my world crashed around me. There was suicide was never a question. It never even entered my mind. People ask me that all the time. Like the pain was enormous. Don't get me wrong. I had two young daughters, and it took me a while to figure out what I'm about to say to you. But yeah, I made some pretty bad decisions and choices, but there's a whole lot of really good things that happened over those 10 years that nobody can take away from me or my former partner and what we did. And it's not important what those things are, but once you realize that, once you're able to separate it, you have some sort of a foundation to build on. I knew I had to get to work right away. I went into the real estate industry. I was very, very fortunate to meet some incredible people up in Harlem. And it seemed like the natural transition, kind of first cousin. And so, back to the 22 months, I went to work the day before I went to prison. I wound the business down by June of 2012. I worked for 2.5 years before I went to prison. I had actually rebuilt already with a second kind of career. And, you put one foot in front of the other. You figure out what to trust that you did right versus what you did wrong. You have the benefit of having made mistakes and bad decisions and knowing the outcome of when you make certain choices. So I think that is the answer. I think also when you have been indicted and know that you're most likely going to go to prison, work is an oasis. It's an escape. It's a heaven. I've never had a problem working. I'm a workaholic, and so I jumped right into it, and that's how I did it. And so when I got out of prison, I had a job waiting for me. I mean, I literally walked out of prison and went to work. I was there the day before. I went back the day after I got out. And most people don't do that. Most
Yeah.
people just sulk in the corner or you have to keep fighting. You have to get off the mat. And it may not be easy and it doesn't happen right away. But if you don't, then it wins. Then they win. The government wins or the state. I mean, they win. And that was not an option. They were going to take my freedom away from me. They were going to take money away from me, but they weren't going to take, my mind away from me, and they weren't going to take my ability to rebuild. And so I think that that's the short answer to the question. And so coming out of prison, I already had something stable to walk back into, but that's because I spent my time creating that stability before I went in.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't sit at home waiting to go to prison. And so I think that that's the short answer,
Nice. I love
or
that.
not so short. I don't know.
Yeah, no, well, I love that. And I love that you can look back on the time leading up to when it all fell apart and say there's a lot of good there too, because that is so central to the process of representing our clients to make sure the judges understand, yeah, that's the government story. That one bad thing that you did, that choice that you made, and they want to define you by that and that alone. And our monumental task is to say, no, you're going to define us by the totality of our life's work. We're not just our worst day on earth, or we're not just the worst choice that we've made. So I love that. I kind of feel like I want to go inside because you have an up close and personal relationship with the system from the inside, and just talking about in terms of places that you were incarcerated. I looked at your bio. The first thing that jumped out was a word we've heard all the time and seen lots of TV shows and horror stories, and it's Rikers Island. So I want to talk about that, but there was something before that, and it was called the Tombs. You said you went to the Tombs, and I don't know what the Tombs are. Doesn't sound very nice. What is that?
So, 100 Center Street in Manhattan, downtown, is where New York State Supreme Court is, and the criminal division. So when you are arrested or indicted, or now things have changed, but let's go back to when it happened to me, or you're sentenced, your journey started out in a place called the Tombs. So when I was indicted on February 6th, it was a Thursday, 2014. They brought me down to 100 Center Street. We were arraigned. We went in front of the judge. They agreed on bail. And obviously, we posted bail eventually, but it took a couple of days. So Thursday night, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, until I was released Monday night, I was held in the prison portion, the jail complex of 100 Center Street. They call it the Tombs because tombs and catacombs are way below ground. So this prison was below, the courthouses, and it reminded you of tombs. I mean, it's very dark. The cells, I think it just, it became a slang word for what was there. It doesn't, thinking about prison and what it was like in there, it connotes tombs and death and mummies and all that stuff. So that's where you were held. So for those 4 days, it was an individual cell, and it was a common area that they let you out several times a day. But that's what the tombs were. And then when you were sentenced, you went invariably, the day of sentencing, you were processed, and you would stay at the tombs anywhere for 1, 2, 3, or 4 days before going to the place everyone wants to talk about, which is Rikers Island. They have since shut down the tombs. It is no longer in use. They do not house anybody there. The jail area that is below the courthouse now is just used to take people into remand, be processed, and held to get on a bus to take them to Rikers Island. But it is no longer a functioning jail. It's a hold till you go to Rikers, usually the same day.
Is that because it was so bad, or they just, do you know why they shut that down?
I think a couple of reasons. The conditions were absolutely deplorable. It just, the conditions were terrible. It wasn't really that safe. And we, for better or for worse, the New York State has massively decarcerated over the last 2 decades. I mean, at its peak, the entire state had over 70,000 incarcerated individuals. New York State is down to around 31,000. In the city, Rikers Island at its peak, or when I was there, so like 16, 17,000 people. At the height of COVID, it was down to 4. I think it's now around 6, or I think it's around 7,000 again. But so between it being deplorable and cost savings, they just stopped. I think that was just, they just stopped using it. They didn't need as much space.
So put some meat on
There's
the
one
bones.
other thing I should mention,
Yeah.
actually, too. This was
Please.
another crucial part of it. They reformed the bail laws in New York. So they basically obliterated bail being used. And, we don't have to get into the politics of it, but, the number, you have to commit a pretty heinous crime right now to be required to be held on bail. So, people are getting arrested. They're walking in, they're saying hello, they're stamping, their fingerprints, and they're walking right back out on the street.
Okay, so tell me about deplorable. When you say the tombs were deplorable, the conditions were horrible, what does that look like?
Dirty, filthy, dust all over the place, damp, mold, mice, mice droppings, leaks in ceilings, cracks in floors. I can go on if you want.
I mean, I think I'm not trying to be
what you would
sensational
think of as
about it.
inhumane. Oh, and cold,
Yeah, right.
cold.
And I'm not trying to be sensational about it. I think, well, in story, the details make the story, but the truth is, the whole point of this podcast is our system is famous for dehumanizing people. And I don't think there's a much better example of dehumanization than taking someone and putting them in those kinds of conditions. Just because you're not even convicted of anything at that point, right? Well, I guess when you get into tombs, well, you're in the tombs when you're arrested.
Depends. The people who are indicted are innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
The people who are sentenced are guilty.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the deal. We had Sheriff Joe out here famously, and he ran his prison like, in the tents, and the people don't really even wrap their head around the fact that the majority of people in his deplorable jail hadn't even been sentenced yet, which meant, yeah, they're innocent. They hadn't pled guilty. They hadn't been convicted. They're innocent people until they're not. And it would strike me in a civilized society that we would give that a little bit more, put a little truth behind that phrase and say, okay, we're gonna take that presumption of innocence, and if we absolutely must incarcerate you, we don't have to make it a living hell, right? If our true goal is to actually protect society and do justice over the long term. But anyway, I'm off my soapbox now. I hate hearing stories like that. I want to talk about Rikers. So tell me about going to Rikers. What's that?
It's everyone's favorite topic, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
It's the one thing. I mean, people. I had spoken with a couple of people who had been in New York State prison before I went in, and one gentleman in particular said to me, "I'm just telling you, and just so you understand." He said, "When you get out, it's all people want to talk about. It's this most fascinating concept that people want to talk about prison and what happens in prison, and then throw Rikers into the mix, and it's invariably everyone wants a story. What I tell people is whatever images you conjure up, whatever you think, it's worse. My description of the Tombs to you a few moments ago, the Tombs is like a Ritz-Carlton condition wise compared to Rikers. I mean, Rikers is a hellhole. I mean, it is awful. Not only from infrastructure standpoint, obviously from a safety standpoint, there are, the hallways, have enough width where violence can happen. You at its peak, you often had 60 people in a dorm, which I can describe for you in a moment, with one corrections officer assigned to the dorm. I mean, there's no chance you're going to prevent violence. It's a scary place. It's a very, very scary place. I got there. I'll never forget this. The first we got off the bus, and I was in like a holding cell area where they process you and they take your photo ID. And they were like, it was like 5 different holding cells for each borough, like Manhattan, right? The Bronx, Staten Island, Queens, forgetting a borough in Brooklyn. And I was like, am I at summer camp? I'm watching all of these other inmates there shouting across to their friends in the other boroughs. They all knew each other. What are you back for? They're throwing sweatshirts across. One guy's on his way out, one guy's on his way in. A lot of them were gang. I was like, I tell people all the time, I use this in whenever I'm recorded. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I mean, that scene when they're in the cantina in the original Star Wars, I mean, you're like in the, you're in the Star Wars cantina there. It's like an alternate universe. And, there's 20 of you in this cell, okay, with one bench, maybe 2. People are sitting on the floor. People are sleeping on the floor. Now, mind you, you have no idea if the person next to you is going to stab you. I mean, you don't know anything. I mean, people are smuggling drugs in there. They're getting the drugs out of their body without being too graphic. I mean, it's an unreal, surreal atmosphere, and it really all happens. And I'm giving you the PG version. So, and then the dorms, mice running all over the place all the time. I mean, you hear them scurrying at night. Filth, dirt, very little fresh air, whatsoever. They do have like porters who come in and try to wash down the bathrooms and the stalls and stuff, but everything's old, everything's broken, everything's leaking. It's just, it's you people do go outside. I never went outside at Rikers. You can go out for like an hour. You just don't go outside. It's where at least 50% of the violence happens. So you're stuck inside this, animal house, essentially. And when I walked in, If you just think of visualize a rectangle, with the top of the rectangle up here by me, or like one of those old World War II infirmary wards, 20 beds down the left, 20 beds down the center, 20 beds down the right, metal frame beds with a thin mattress, 2 feet apart from each other, maybe, I don't even think, yeah, 2 feet apart. I mean, you can literally put your arm out like that and touch the person next to you. And you walk in and you just see this, you're like, oh my God. And the dorm I was in was not ununique. I was saying, there were 42 members of a specific gang in that dorm. And, for the first 5 days, I thought I was an undercover cop, which thankfully nothing happened. But yeah, it's surreal, and you don't know what's going to happen, at any point in time, or ever. So,
Do they
the cafeteria is disgusting. The food's disgusting. I mean, there's just
Wow.
there's nothing sanitary or humane about the place, and that's before the violence.
I imagine you witnessed some of that violence.
I did. Mhm.
Yeah. Which is trauma. That's just layers of trauma. I mean, do you got to get help for that? I mean, you just carry that with you. I don't want
No,
to have to.
it's a very good question. There are certain lingering PTSD issues that, you deal with or surface, as a result of things like this. I mean, I have certain standalone memories that will never, ever, ever get out of my head. There was a fight that broke out in the dorm one day, and I will never forget what happened. I'll never forget, a 6'2", 300-pound guy just leapfrog over my head to a bed to go attack someone. I'll never forget people coming up to me afterwards, just making sure I was okay, which I was very fortunate because I found a way to just, stay out of harm's way and help some people in there. Just be like, are you okay? Don't worry, nothing's going to happen to you. But yeah, I mean, there's visuals. Those visuals never go. Any violence you ever see never goes away. And yeah, sure, you talk to people about it. I mean, professionals, and just 2 PTSD examples. I will never sit with my back to the door of anything. So any restaurant, I'm watching who's coming through the door. Like my back is I do never have my back to blind
Wow.
spots
Wow.
ever. It's very hard to sleep. I shouldn't say it's never dark in prison, right? There's always lights on
Yeah.
for security reasons.
Yeah.
So in order for you to kind of get complete blackout, one thing that a lot of people do, not everybody, you put a t-shirt over your eyes and it gets you complete darkness. But I still do that. It's a
Wow.
crazy, I mean, that's like one of those things that like it just came out with me. And I don't know if that made me feel safe inside. I don't know what it was, but those are just two little kind of nuggets. There's many more.
How long were you at Rikers?
So I was there for 5.5 weeks, and I should have been there for 10 days. Another unique thing to the New
Uh,
York State
well,
criminal justice system.
yeah. Well, my first question is there no such thing as self-surrender in New York State
No,
system?
that's correct. In the Federal Bureau of Prisons, you drive up, park in the parking lot, knock on the
Yeah.
front door, and say, "Hi, I'm here."
Right.
Right? Which is humane and normal and logical. Many state departments of corrections don't function that way. They're more antiquated. I don't, know why they still do it this way. But so in New York State, when you're sentenced in down here or anywhere in the state, when you're sentenced, you go into the county jail. The county jail down here happens to
You're
be
going right into custody.
right into
The day
custody.
of
That's it.
sentencing.
Right. You plea, the day you go to court, and the day that you have an agreed, I mean, I'm not talking trial here. If you have a pre-negotiated plea, and
Nobody's
then
talking trial in our system.
right, exactly. We both know
But
that. Right,
yeah,
right.
but okay.
Right. Another reason they don't need the tombs, because they don't need to hold anybody there to go to trial, because no one goes to trial anymore.
Mhm.
So you take your plea, like I took my plea, and then they set a sentencing date. And the day you go back for sentencing is the day you're going to prison.
Okay.
That's it. You're going. As soon as it's over, they take you into custody through the side door, processing, and on your way to Rikers. And so there is no self-surrender at all. So in the New York State corrections law, they have 10 business days to take custody of you. Believe it or not, the minute you're sentenced, you're the custody and property of New York State. The City Department of Corrections, Rikers, which is part of the state, does the state a favor and holds you in custody until they come pick you up. Literally, they drive you up to what's called a reception facility. Obviously, it doesn't always happen that it's 10 days, and in COVID, people were there for months. In my case, there are sentence and commitment papers. In the federal system, this is all done. It's done. Everything's waiting for you at the prison. Grand Prairie's done their thing. There's no risk. In our case, they sign stuff the day of sentencing. Well, if a signature is missing, one signature on one form, you're not considered state ready. So your paperwork goes up to central office in Albany, and they say, "Oh, signature missing." Back down, start the whole process over. The clerk, my judge's clerk, didn't sign my commitment papers. So instead of being out of there in 10 days, I wound up getting trapped there for 4 more weeks.
Wow. I wonder if that clerk knows the consequence of that negligence, and if
I have
so,
no
whether
doubt.
the clerk
I have no
cares.
doubt that the clerks know. It's human nature. I'm not bashing on any clerks. I don't know them
Yeah.
all, but it's, it's not unreasonable to think that every once in a while they forget something to, send a message. Yeah, they have power to do that. I'm sure many times it's innocent.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to believe that if they knew the consequences of that,
Oh, they know the
they'd be
consequences.
much more careful about it.
You want to
They'd
know
be-
how I know they know the consequences? Who do you
Yeah.
think you have to go back to actually get the signature?
Well, the same clerk.
Exactly.
Right, but are they thinking about the fact that a human being is sitting in Rikers for 5 weeks instead of 10 days? And do they know
Well,
what that
they
really,
know it. What
do
they're
they care?
thinking, you and I just
Yeah.
can speculate, but they know it.
Yeah. Okay. So no self-surrender. That's a big distinction, because that's one of the main benefits in federal system, because if you got, some people do get taken into custody when they plead or the day of sentencing. It happens, and then they have to go to a holding facility. It's not Rikers Island, but it's not the BOP either. It's not, nobody wants to be in a federal detention facility. They want to go straight to wherever they've been designated to serve their sentence, which is oftentimes, in a case like yours, white collar, what we would call a camp. Now, of course, people have this idyllic version of what a camp is in the federal system, but it's still prison, but there's no walls and whatever. It's definitely where you want to be if you're federally convicted. But it doesn't sound like there's any such thing as a camp in New York State either, is there?
There are no camps in New York State at all. By the way, I'll just say this to finish off one of the thoughts you thought. With remand in New York State, if you go to trial and you're convicted, at that moment, the judge has an option to remand you or let you go back and then take you into custody at sentencing. There are no camps in New York State. They don't exist. There, at a time, I think at its peak might have been 6 or 7 minimum security facilities, which are work release facilities. There were 2 shock incarceration facilities, which were the military, the military boot camp, that program that the state offers. There's now only 1, and they've consolidated all of the other work release facilities down to, for men, down to I think 3. There's one in Queensboro, in Queens, New York. There's one in Hudson, New York. They closed the one down in Rochester, and it's escaping me where the 3rd one is. But no, there are no camps. You are either in a medium security prison or you are in a maximum security prison. And no part of being in a New York State prison at all should be confused with a federal prison. And no part of a medium security prison in New York State should be compared in any way to a federal camp or like an FCI low. There's very little commonality.
All right, so tell me, where do you end up, and what is that like?
So in the state, talking about you don't self-surrender, the state, the way they do it is you go to what's called a reception facility or an intake facility. In simple parlance, it's a clearinghouse.
This is
for
after
everyone.
Rikers. That's
Is
where you
after
go next?
Rikers.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
that, everyone from down here would either go to a place called Ulster Correctional Facility, which is a medium security facility in Ellenville, New York, or they would have gone to Downstate Correctional Facility, which was a maximum security reception facility. Downstate's closed now. So you either go to Ulster, which is the medium, or you get your first taste of hell by going to Greenhaven Correctional Facility, staying there for a night to 3 nights in complete 24-hour isolation. And you make your way up to Elmira Correctional Facility in Elmira, New York, and that's the maximum security reception. So everyone goes to reception, go through a whole set of intake again, tests, medical tests, aptitude tests, and they figure out programming for you, so on and so forth. And then the Division of Classification and Movement in the central office in Albany, New York, figures out where you're going to go from reception. You could be in reception for 2 weeks. You could be in reception for 8 weeks. There's no mathematical formula. Every situation's different. It's a function of bed space. It's a function of crime. It's a function of you're centrally monitored, so on and so forth. But so step one is you go to a reception facility. And then once you leave reception, you go to what, they call it your permanent place. I mean, depending on how long you're in prison, it's not permanent, but you go to a place that you're going to be at generally for a while. Some of the intake and reception facilities also are permanent. So like Elmira is not only reception, it's a maximum security prison. So you could say there. In the case of Ulster, Ulster is only a reception facility. That's it. Everyone goes, everyone leaves, except for I want to say 40 or 50 individuals who do the cadre work for the prison. And they're people who've served a long, long time, are on their way home, and it's kind of a reward to be there since it's so close to New York.
So I gotta back up because it looks like another difference. It looks like New York has, I guess you'd call it indeterminate sentencing. I'm looking at your CV. It says you were sentenced to 1.5 to 4.5 years. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so it is.
Well, and by the way, sorry to interrupt, but I'm
sure.
curious to know, because in a federal case, if it's a financial case, it's usually the loss amount or the dollar amount that drives the guidelines. And it's ridiculous. It doesn't take much to get way, way up in the guidelines. And the guidelines we see are almost always worse than 1.5 to 4.5. So I'd be interested to know, like, what's the bottom line dollar amount that's involved in your case, and compare that to what you might have been looking at if your case would have been charged federally.
Yeah. So to answer the first question about 1.5 to 4.5, it's an indeterminate sentence because it's not determined what you're going to do. You can do 1.5, or you can do 4.5, and you can do somewhere in between. There are also determinate sentences in New York, which is what all federal prisoners get. You get a determinate sentence, a flat bid, in street parlance. In an indeterminate bid is what a lot of people call a split bid, right? It's a split number. In the case of a 1.5 to 4.5 year sentence, just to make the sentencing part of this simple and then talk to you about how you get the numbers and stuff, it means you're going to serve a minimum of 1.5 years with an asterisk, because you have the opportunity to earn 1/6 of that minimum off. So you really could go home in 15 months. Excuse me, if you do certain programming.
Mm-hmm.
And you would do a maximum of 4.5 years. However, when you go to prison, if you behave properly, the maximum amount of time you're going to serve is 2/3 of the max. So when I was, and they call that a conditional release date. So when I got sentenced to 1.5 to 4.5, I was going in saying, okay, I'm going to do somewhere between 18 months and 3 years. Right?
Yeah.
And of course, whether you go home at 18 months or not, which is now another huge, massive difference between federal and state. When you have an indeterminate sentence, you appear in front of a parole board, and the parole board controls your fate as to whether or not you are or are not going to go home. In a determinate sentence, very similar to federal. With federal, I think you do 84.67% of your, in New York State, you do 6/7. So I think it's like 85. I mean, that part is almost identical.
Yeah.
And so in New York State, you have classes of felony. You have violent and nonviolent, and you have A, B, C, D, and E. Okay. And after an E felony, it then becomes misdemeanors, A, B, C. Okay. And then violent and non-violent A's, B's, C's all have different sentencing ranges, and you would call them guidelines federal, but these are not guidelines. Like judges are bound to the options in a sentencing range.
Yeah.
So, and then in a financial crime case, tax, larceny, whatever it is, the it's a nonviolent felony. Now, whether it's a B, C, D, or E, A felonies are really for murder and drugs. There's no A financial crimes. Whether it's a B, C, D, or E, all is about the amount, right? So similar to the federal. So based on where the amount of your crime falls for a felony, B, C, D, or E, then there are sentencing ranges with which the judge can choose from, and that the district attorney, the defense attorney, and the judge work towards a plea resolution.
So your plea is typically going to say you're pleading to an A, or you're pleading to a B or a C or a D or something like that, and that's just going to set the determinant range that way.
Yeah, so every you have to read between the lines with certain sentencings, right? For like a B financial felony, right? The judge can sentence you anywhere from 1 to 3 years. What you think about this? 1 to 3, all the way up to 8 1/3 to 25. I mean, that's a massive range, a massive, massive amount of discretion that the judge has. The closer you get to 1 to 3 suggests that there was a lot of negotiation and a lot of mitigation, to get you there. Like if a B felony can result in 8 1/3 to 25, and you get at the low end of the range, you did something wrong. You broke the law, but relative to whatever the government probably thought you did, that's not what happened. And so that's how the sentencing all breaks down. So
Gotcha.
obviously, if you go to trial, it's up to the judge. If you have a negotiated plea, that's it. That's the one other thing about New York State, is that if you have a negotiated plea, okay. I actually have asked a couple of criminal defense attorneys this question. If you have a negotiated plea, when you go to sentencing, you are getting that sentence. The only time a judge really departs is if you screwed up between the plea and sentencing, if you lied to the probation officer or something like that. I asked a criminal defense attorney earlier this week, who's been practicing for 50 years, if you've ever seen a judge downward depart from the negotiated plea? And he said no.
Yeah.
So you do at least have the comfort of knowing I plead to this. It's agreed. The judge, it's binding. The judge is giving it to me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very much like federal in that sense. They're stipulated pleas and their recommendations. You want to go for a stipulated plea, and if you do, the judge has to either follow the plea, or they could reject the whole plea, but then you could go to trial if you wanted to. So another difference.
One quick difference, if you don't mind me interjecting. I've been in federal sentencings, right? Federal sentencings are, you don't know what's going to happen. Government's asking for 10 to 12, defense attorney's asking for, 36 months or whatever it is. You don't know where the judge is going to land. In New York State, sentencing is a negotiated plea sentencing in New York State is one of the most anticlimactic things that happens. There's nothing there.
A good federal defense attorney in the right jurisdiction, because everyone has their little culture about what they will and will not agree to, but a good federal defense attorney is going for that certainty as much as they can. And for example, in my district, in the District of Arizona, a very common stipulation is a cap at the low end. Now you're not 100% sure what the guideline range comes out to be, because there's such a morass and but you kind of, if you've been doing this long enough, there are very few surprises there. So that's definitely doable. Now there are some jurisdictions I work all over, and they say we're just going to plead open, and sometimes I'm wondering, well, why do you do that at all? Like, if they're not promising you anything and you're getting your measly 3 levels off for acceptance, you can get that by pleading straight up to the court. What do you need a plea agreement for at all? And by the way, you're waiving all your right to appeal and everything else in a plea agreement. So, I sometimes wish that defense attorneys were a little more aggressive in the federal system when it comes to really negotiating some terms of a plea agreement. So I agree with you in that perspective, but I would also just say it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. In a perfect world, which you and I both know we're not living in.
No,
But
no.
all right. So here's an interesting thing that we don't have in federal system, to my knowledge, is work release, furloughs, overnights, weekend for well, that's not true actually. The first white collar case I tried in federal court when I was a baby federal defender was a tax case, and unfortunately we came in second. And my client went to a camp, and he was sending me postcards when he was off doing he had a weekend furlough with his daughters on the town. And so I guess maybe we do have that in federal. I don't know if we still do. um, but tell me about work. We certainly don't have work release that I know of either, so tell me how that works, who's eligible for it, and what is it?
Sure. And maybe I'll back into it just by sharing a little bit more about max and medium, prisons in New York State. They have, so obviously medium is medium, max is max. Within max, they have max A and max B. So max A is what you would call a super max, right? So, there's just there it's a security thing, right? And medium A, medium B,
Yeah.
similar things. But all mediums and maxes obviously have barbed wire. They have fences all around, people up in the towers. Thing about, and similar to federal, thing about New York State prison is that, the longer your sentence, the longer you're in, and the better you behave, your security classification drops over time.
Yeah.
So, what people ask me all the time, like, who am I going to, for people going to medium security prisons, like, who am I going to be with? And I could tell you, I worked in the library at Ogdensburg Correctional Facility, which is now closed. It was on the Canadian border. You literally could see the Canadian flag. Um, I worked in the library with a guy who was in for murder too. He had been in for 20 years already, and he had worked his way down to a medium security facility. And, you're in, so in my case, white collar, you're in with people that are in for guns, for drugs, and for assaults. I mean, you're commingled. Because as time goes on and your security, as I said, classification drops, people come down with you.
Yeah.
So, that's different than federal, in a lot of ways. What I will say to you is that as it pertains to the concept of work release, what I tell everyone is that the true umbrella is called temporary release. Okay. Temporary release is what you would think it is. You're temporarily released for custody to do certain things. Okay. Whether it's to work in the community, whether it's to get an education, whether it's to do an asbestos training program, or whether it's your kind of traditional work release, or there's an industrial training program. So to be eligible for temporary release within New York State, there are many factors. There's a scoring system where you need a minimum of 32 points even to be eligible. And I have it, I think I have it over here somewhere. If people like visuals, I won't flutter around too long. Here, there are a list of 81 crimes here that are ineligible for temporary release.
Mm-hmm.
So if you commit any one of those, and you would imagine what many of those are, murder, you're not eligible. The manslaughter, you're not eligible. So, and then there are and they're not defined anywhere, but well, actually, that's not true. They are defined. There's about 16 or 17 crimes that the Division of Temporary Release will, if they choose, will conduct something called a violent felony offense review, where they'll look at your offense, they'll look at your file, and they may say, you know what? He had a gun in his home, but he wasn't going to use it to hurt anybody. It was there for the wrong reasons, or, he had a gun in his truck, but he did have a license, but it wasn't kept in the box it was supposed to be kept in. And so you're in there for a possession, and that's a disqualifying crime, but maybe we'll let this person into a temporary release program. Let's screen them. It doesn't mean you get in, let's screen them. But for temporary release, it's kind of the holy grail. That's the equivalent of, when I say a camp in federal. So the four most well-known temporary release programs in New York State are there's an asbestos training program where you actually get certified by New York State in asbestos training. It's an 18-month program that they run. The second most well-known is a temporary release program called CASAT, CASAT, stands for Comprehensive Alcohol Substance Abuse Treatment Program. It's the state's equivalent to RDAP. Although in RDAP, in the federal system, you get time cut off. In the state, you don't get time cut off for doing CASAT. It's a 6-month intensive drug rehabilitation program. It's only done at 2 facilities. These are very, very hard to get into if you think about it. The thing about CASAT is 95% of the time, you're approved for what's called presumptive release. So they basically have pre-screened you to finish CASAT and go right to work release. Like, we're going to put you in this drug rehab program. You finish it. Your reward is you go right to work release, which I'll get to in a minute. There's a third program called industrial training, which is what I did. That was in Hudson, New York. That's like work release for the state. The Department of Corrections owns a company called Corecraft. They make all the prison products, so clothing, desks, chairs, everything. They have a huge warehouse and central office in Albany, New York. If you are lucky enough to get into the industrial training program, you live in a minimum security building, one of the very few in New York State. It's kind of like a one-level medical facility. You literally can walk out the front door, walk out to the parking lot, and go. Monday through Friday, you get on a coach bus and you go up to the warehouse. You either work on the warehouse floor, or you work in the back office, and you get to start to go out one day a weekend, right? Every Saturday, every weekend, you can either go out from 9 to 5 on Saturday or Sunday. And then after 90 days, you qualify for weekend furloughs, which is you start. So industrial training is like the second best thing to get into because you start to reintegrate into society rather quickly.
Yeah.
And then there's traditional work release, which is what you would think it is. You get transferred to a work release facility. You stay there 2, 3, or 4 nights a week. You stay at home the other nights of the week. You get a job and you go back to work. Historically, people never really spent more than 6 months in work release, maybe a year. CASAT and industrial training are 6-month programs that feed to work release automatically.
Nice.
But now with the desire, again, to decarcerate, to get people back into society quicker, people are spending more time in work release, and they're starting to let people stay home more and more, relaxing the need for bed space at the work release facilities. So I think I answered your question, but those are getting into one is like hitting prison lotto. I mean, it really is.
Well, so I am on record extolling the virtues of prison consultants in the sense that super necessary function. Lawyers don't know what they don't know, especially after when it sentencing's over. We don't know anything you've ever talked to me about in the last hour that we've been talking. I would have no way of knowing but for somebody like you. And so my guess is you didn't have a Craig Rothfeld to give you all this information and prepare you for everything that you were going to encounter once you hit sentencing and went into the tombs and beyond. And now you're that guy predominantly. That's a major part of your function. Is that right?
Yeah. So actually I had someone who's, family to me. Joel Sickler, who runs the Justice Advocacy
Oh,
Group.
right.
Joel has someone who worked for him who had done some time in New York. There was no New York State prison consultants. There wasn't one when I went in. And Joel's very close with my criminal defense attorneys, Mark Ignifilo and Ben Bar. And he had someone who worked for him who knew the state. So, I had that sort of little extra security going into it. And but he's one of the biggest reasons I have the practice I have today. He shut down his New York practice. He refers it all to me. It just wasn't his wheelhouse or his specialty. So yeah, I had someone, but not in New York, not someone who focused on New York, at all. And you're right. The lawyers are my clients as much as anyone. I get my business from lawyers or current clients, and the attorneys, are candid and honest and wonderful. And they tell the clients, like, we can't help you the minute it's just, sure, we know this or we know that, but like, this is just not our world. We're doing you a disservice. And we don't know what goes on in there. And here's someone who lived it personally, studied it, and lives it every day right now. That's the person that can help you. And so you are correct in that assumption.
And
It's a baton handoff, at sentencing.
It's so important. And it's not just, I mean, it's a huge part of what is it going to be like day to day? How do I conduct myself so I don't find myself in trouble or at odds with other inmates? But this whole system of the work release, the work furlough, and everything else, I imagine there's a whole lot of positioning and things to navigate. You've been to college, like you have more education and kind of more wherewithal than a lot of folks that are going into that system. But I'm guessing there's a lot of obstacles to navigating that in a way that you can actually get into this programming. So that's kind of what you're helping out with that too, I imagine, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's general programming that's required just to like get your, what I call your good time. If you want to qualify for temporary release, there are certain things that you need to do. I as well, there are things that you can do before you go in that I advise people, on what to do in order to position themselves to be ready there. There's facility conversations, all sorts of that stuff is discussed before. I mean, I have an entire, transition planning checklist, which I give to clients. Not everything applies to each client, but yeah, there are items in there that are geared towards being in position that when they are eligible to get into a temporary release program, they can. There's a whole component of just making sure if you have an indeterminate sentence and you're eligible for merit time, that you can get your merit time, right? Not every indeterminate sentence is eligible. So financial indeterminate crimes, you can earn 1/6 off the minimum. If you get convicted, for argument's sake, of vehicular manslaughter, and you get a sentence of say 3 to 9 years, you can't earn a third off the 3. You're not a sixth off the 3. Like, you have to do the 3, even though it's indeterminate. So absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can do to prepare for before you go in. And then there's very significant stuff, obviously, once you're in. I mean, obviously for me, I love being engaged, before they go in, for a myriad of reasons. But I'm engaged at many, many points along the journey, as I like to say.
Probably help them if they're having grievances or to navigate filing what we would call them administrative petitions or whatever in BOP. But is that a thing in the state system as well?
Yeah. So in the BOP, it's cop outs and BP8s and 9s and stuff. Yeah. They have grievances in New York State that you can file a grievance and you get a grievance hearing, and then you can appeal it. And there's administrative remedies in the central office. If you don't win all of that and you want to sue the Department of Corrections, you can file what's called an Article 78. So yeah, there's a lot of administrative, stuff there. They have tier infractions, tier 1, 2, and 3 tickets in New York State. There's, loss of good time. You can be put into solitary. So dealing with all of that. Listen, I have a client who has very significant medical needs. I have spent the last 72 hours just getting his medication sorted out. And, the medical staff's lying to the medical doctors and executives at the facility. He's getting prescription bottles that say, he has quantity X, and they've really only given him quantity Y. And if he doesn't take it, he doesn't take his blood pressure medication, he could have a heart attack. I mean, that's the kind of stuff. I mean, that's just one example of stuff that you kind of deal with for somebody who's inside. But I'm happy to explain different things that you do for people. But I want to at least make sure I answered the original question.
Yeah. Well, I would like to ask on so these are all things that happen after they go in, but it looks like on your CV you do things for pre-sentencing and mitigation strategies. So I will say, as much as I'm on record extolling the virtues of prison consultants for everything that happens after sentencing, I'm also on record being a little bit, I guess critical is the right word, about prison consultants advising on sentencing strategies and sentencing mitigation strategies, only insofar as it's sort of not under the umbrella or the auspices of the attorney, because we're control freaks and we're power freaks. But I guess I would love to just kind of get a sense from you about what kind of advocacy are we doing pre-sentence that you would help the client with.
Yeah, I think that some of it's similar to federal, but I think this is where there is a big distinction. You don't in New York State, if you have a negotiated plea, you don't need a pre-sentencing report. It's done. That's it. Right? You go to, I went to the judge, I took a plea. Judge told me I was getting 1.5 to 4.5. That was it. I could show up at sentencing in my sweatpants and I was getting 1.5 to 4.5. I didn't need a letter, nothing. Right? It's very, 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 very different. So that's not necessarily something that people, could be critical about. Now, that said, there are situations, as I've told you, where it's not a negotiated plea or it's a ranged plea, right? The government says, up to 5. We're asking for 3.5. That's a place where I might assist attorneys in preparing a pre-sentencing memorandum. There are things that I might be able to contribute there. If there's a mental health component to it or a medical component, I might be able to contribute to crafting what goes on there. If you are convicted at a trial, then it's an open sentencing. Absolutely have a need for a pre-sentencing report to argue the merits of what you think the sentence are. From a reporting standpoint, and then I can talk to you about that part of it. The mitigation for me is as much about when they're in, mitigating them doing the most amount of time, right? There's not a ton of sentence reduction mitigation in New York State work because, as I said, 95 or 98%, 97% of them are pre-negotiated pleas. I have prepared pre-sentencing medical reports, which are not going to impact sentencing, but they will impact where certain custody issues at Rikers, certainly custody issues when they go upstate. I've prepared pre-sentencing psychiatric reports. In New York State, anything psychiatric is not just the Department of Corrections. It's also, the Office of Mental Health, right? So, there's all sorts of that stuff as well. Sorry if my phone's ringing there. I thought I turned it off. So, there's that, no, someone from prison, actually. There's that function of it as well.
I was listening to Al Franken's podcast and his phone went off and he said, "I'm sorry, I'm waiting on a call. I need a new liver." So
yeah. Well, thankfully my assistant's getting that call from Cape Vincent Correctional Facility. So, that's where a lot of pre-sentence reporting comes in, real stuff that I can do. When I get contacted by the lawyers in the earliest part of the phase, they call me because they're negotiating the plea and they just want to know, look, if he gets this, what is he eligible for? If he gets that, what are you eligible for? Can they be in temporary release with this crime? Can they not be in temporary release? Are they going to go to a medium? Are they going to go to a maximum? When is the parole hearing going to be? So I get a lot of calls from the attorneys just to talk them through that. And then they use that in their, plea negotiating strategy. But usually that happens all the time. But usually once a client takes a plea, that's when I'll be brought in, because at that point, they're like, I'm going to prison, and their head's spinning. That's when the 10,000 questions start spinning.
Yeah.
In their heads, their mother's heads, their father's heads, their wives' heads, their girlfriend's heads, their brother, friends' heads, and stuff like that.
And so it sounds to me like it's more often than not, it's a lawyer bringing you on to the team as opposed to the client or the family seeking you out on their own. Is that fair to say or no?
Yeah, I mean, yes, the super majority are attorneys that I've worked with or attorneys who call other attorneys and say, is there anyone who does this. That's the super majority. Now, what I may not know is if the family went to the attorney and said, "Can you find me one?" Right? I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, I got to think about this now. I've never had a family contact me directly unless they were referred to me by an attorney or they were referred to me by a client inside, right? I've never had someone say, "Hey, I found you online. I'm going to talk to my attorney about you." It's coming from the attorney or it's coming from a referral of an attorney to a family or a client
Yeah.
inside. Like a client I met with, he's not a client, but he's going to be a client earlier this week. I asked the attorney, ask every attorney, "How'd you find me?" And he said, "I went online, I typed in New York State prison consultant, and your name popped up."
Okay. So I guess my question to you is you work with lawyers day in and day out. Tell me what you like, what have you seen about the way we're doing our jobs that you think you could give us good advice on how to do better?
Good, loaded question. Good question. So in answering that, even so, part of the answer to that is circling back to what you were just saying about the attorneys and when they call and working with them and at what phase are they involved. What I'm not going to be, listen, I would never be critical of criminal defense attorneys, not just because of the people who refer business to me. I mean, we have two different roles. What I was going to say is when I'm brought in before someone goes to prison, I ride, I ride co-pilot, right? The attorney is the pilot to the main, attorney's driving the car until you go to prison. So anything I do, it's with a check off with the family and the attorney. Till you're sentenced, anything can happen. So it's, we're working hand in hand. There are a lot of things I do that the attorney defers for me to do, but they're in charge up until that minute. The minute they get sentenced, the attorneys are like, "You're in charge.
Yeah.
Call me if you need me." And so, that is helpful. I think another thing that is true is that I'm able, it's a lot of times very hard to get attorneys on the phone. Not and I just they're busy. They're really
Yeah.
good criminal defense attorneys are really, really busy. It's very, very hard. They're
Yeah.
forced to operate like ER surgeons. This is not me being critical. It's a reality,
Yeah.
and I'm helpful to the attorneys because people can call me with questions that I might be able to answer that they can't, or I have, I'm fortunate that I can call the attorney and say, "Listen, this is important. You really do need to call them back on that." Or I can write a question to the attorney and say, "Hey, they want to know this. I'm happy to take care of it." So it's very much a partnership in that regard up until the point that they're sentenced. I think the thing that's unfortunate, and I don't know that it's a blame game, it's really not, is that when I get clients who have already been sentenced or already taken a plea and are inside, and there were things that could have been done in the sentencing or potentially negotiated that would have opened them up to other programming or potentially temporary release, right? And someone's going to say, like, "Well, that's not true. They got the sentence they got because they were going to get." That isn't actually true. These are negotiated pleas. There are times judges want to actually help the individual. I've seen it. And so I think a big part of what I'm able to do is educate the attorneys. They don't know. Like, if you do this, this happens. If you do this, this is never going to happen. If you do this, this is when the parole hearing happens. The judges will be like, "Oh, well, he can get into this program." Actually, he can't get into
Yeah.
that program. Well, the DA is saying this. Like, that's not true. That can't happen. So I think that's it. But that's the part, obviously, sometimes it's black and white. You don't need my input to what the heck the sentence is going to be and what they are. Murder two is murder two. Murder one's murder one. I mean, I'm
Sure.
not saying those are calls I get. Criminal possession of a weapon. You shot someone. But when things are negotiated, there's a conversation to be had, and I think that the lawyers who know that, make the phone call, and lawyers who don't either ask other lawyers if there's someone who can answer it, or don't. They're just, either they are aware of it, or it could also be financial. Not everybody can hire a prison consultant, so they just may not. You're not making a phone call just because they can't
Yeah.
avail themselves of the services. So
Well, that was my next question, actually, because then I get this too when we talk about sentencing mitigation videos, which is all this is just for wealthy people. and because most people have public defenders and they could never afford a video. And, I tell them that's not true, that they're doing this in public defender offices. I know because I've trained many offices to do it. But that's my question for you. And that's a lot of the rap on the press that you guys get too, which is these are fancy, high dollar fancy consultants that are just there for rich people to buy their way to a shorter jail sentence. So what do the majority of people who have public defenders get when it comes to prison consulting in New York?
Yeah. What I would tell you, first of all, is that the least amount of clients I have are white collar clients. So this idea that it's all white collar people who stole money or stashed money, and it's a misnomer. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a very small percentage of people that are in New York State prison are in for financial crimes. Okay. Obviously people have money to retain me, but of the clients that I have, the least percentage are financial crime clients. I do not believe people hire me to get a lower sentence. That is not why anyone is hiring me. Okay. I might contribute information to an attorney that ultimately impacts the sentence. I am being hired to help people survive this nightmare and bring clarity or light to what is an opaque, dark, this is my, big line that I always say in the paper, Byzantine black hole. That's what I'm being hired to do. I'm being hired to ensure that whatever is supposed to happen happens. Forget about anything being better. Let's just make sure what's supposed to happen happens. Okay. Let's make sure that if there's a safety problem, there's someone who can help. But how do we set up, this is simple commissary. How do we handle phone calls? I got an email an hour before we got on, actually a text message. Craig, this is semi-urgent. I mean, if I turn my screen on, I can read it to you. My husband had his coat stolen today when he was working in the mess hall. They put all their coats on there in a common hanger and someone stole it. It's, 0 degrees up there. He needs a coat. You know how this works. If he puts this through the normal channels, there's retribution. I'm really concerned about him not having a coat. What can you do? That has nothing to do with how much financial resources you have.
Yeah.
No lawyer solving that. Now,
Yeah.
not that a lawyer is not smart enough to solve the problem. It's just people aren't going to pay, $700, $800, $900, $1,000 an hour. It's just not, it's not going to happen. So that, those are the sorts of things that you're doing, right? Ensuring people get medication, getting people to doctor appointments, getting people MRIs scheduled, getting people psychiatric evaluations, getting people, safe if they're being extorted. I mean, Cash App, is very pervasive in the New York State criminal justice system and is a means for people to extort weaker people in prison and have money exchanged without the Department of Corrections knowing about it because it's going app to app, family member to family member. So
yeah,
I think that, when people ask me that, what do you do? So I say, fine, there's the pre-sentencing phase, there's the advocacy phase, and then there's the release phase, which is parole and probation. What's the most important thing you do? I don't know what the most important thing I do is, but I know that I answer people's questions. I take away the mystery. One of the biggest things I can do, having gone through it myself, is to sit down with someone who's going to prison and say, look, it's going to suck. There's no doubt about it. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be fun, but you will get through it. I will help you get through it. And I'm going to tell you what's going to happen along the way so that your anxiety, instead of it being, on a scale of 1 to 10, being a 15, it'll be an 8 because you'll be like, oh, he told me this was going to happen. Oh, this is happening now. Oh, that's happening now. Okay, I'm going to be here for 2 days before I get transferred out. Okay, I don't have to worry about not making a phone call because I'm not allowed to when I'm in transit. Oh, this is where I will or won't get my head shaven. Okay, oh, I'm going to find out about my programming here. That's the benefit, right? That's why people hire me. I have a client who's at Rikers who got transferred today. I was able to talk to him yesterday and said, look, here's what's happening. You're going to Greenhaven Correctional Facility. God willing, you're going to spend tonight there and be on a bus tomorrow and go to Elmira. That may not happen. You may be locked in a cell Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday. You may not leave that thing until Monday. Don't worry. Find a way mentally to get through it. It's not going to be fun. You're not going to be able to talk to anybody, but know that you're getting on a bus Monday. That's a massive amount of anxiety to reduce for an individual, not just him, the family. I spend more time on the phone with the families than I do my clients. You know, the mothers, the fathers, the sisters, the brothers, the wives, the girlfriends.
Yep.
You know, there's not one mom of any client I have that hasn't cried to me at least once. And I think
Mm-hmm.
I'm flattered that they feel comfortable to do it. I mean, you're everything to them. You really are. You're a psychologist, you're a psychiatrist, you're a rabbi, you're a priest, you're a fixer. Everyone loves that word, Um, you solve problems. I mean, you're a communicator, you're a conduit for information. I mean, you're all of the above on any given day for any given client.
Amazing. And I think about this critique that we get about how rich people can afford this. And you'd think that the critique would really be, isn't it a shame that we don't have these resources widely available for everyone, no matter who they are or what their resources are, because they're absolutely essential resources. And
It
yeah,
should be. And I will tell you, there are things that I do pro bono.
yeah.
There are times I get calls for stuff and I just feel
And
compelled, feel compelled to help because it's the right thing to do. I mean, I get calls from people in prison all the time. I'm like, how did you find out about me? It's, oh, so and so told me. When you do a good job for people in a maximum security prison,
word travels fast.
word travels real fast. When you get people out of solitary confinement, when you get people clothing, when you get people a shower, I mean, awful stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but yeah, everyone should have those services. 100%. State of New
Well,
York should be paying me to do this for people.
yeah, there should be, and probably every defender office should have one of you on staff. It's absolutely essential, and it does matter in terms of figuring out how long the sentence is going to be, because it's just another thing we don't know about, or how difficult a sentence is going to be. I had a client right now with a federal manslaughter charge, and it's ridiculously asinine. It's a drunk driving case, and they need alcohol treatment more than anything else. Well, guess what? Because of the nature of the charge, they're not going to be able to get into the RDAP program. Like, how ridiculous is that? The one thing they need more than anything in the world is alcohol counseling and rehabilitation. And they're likely not going to be able to get that if they're sentenced to prison. And by the way, they're right now out on pretrial release in a wonderful program, succeeding admirably and
Yep.
changing their whole life. But yet, we just have to throw them in prison. So, well, we could talk about that all day. I think we have gone for an hour and a half. Wow. And we could keep going. I know I barely hit half of the points that we wanted to talk about. But I am going to wrap it up, but I want to just make sure everybody understands where they can find you if they need you, and hopefully they never will need you. But also just Google Craig Rothfeld, because we didn't talk about this today and we don't have to, but he has a pretty impressive roster of some high profile clients. And, you could see, I found some news clips and things like that where you're talking about some of it. So if you're interested just in digging a little deeper in Craig, Google him. But at the very least, go to www.inside outside limited. That's insideoutsidelltd.com. And that is his website and all of the services that he offers. I know you have a book in the works that were from pretrial to parole. We didn't even talk about the parole process, but I guess we're going to have to save that for another day. Because we don't have parole in the federal system, as you mentioned earlier. But
Correct.
you're working on a book. You're working on finishing up your degree. Is there anything else we need to know about you and what you're up to and what we should be checking out?
I think that's it. I mean, the book will be from plea to parole. it's not meant to be a memoir. It's meant to be something that's a self-help guide. It's meant to be something that can help people and help attorneys. And it's something that, it won't give away every single trade secret, but it's something out there for people who can't afford someone, will have a book and have something that can help them. I think it's a big part of being able to pay it forward. And that's why I'm committed to doing it. I don't need to tell my life story in a book. Like, if someone wants to know my life story, they can give me a phone call, or I have a scotch with them or something, or coffee if you don't drink. So but yeah, that's important to me. Getting that done is important to me. I have committed to diving right in as soon as my master's is done in 4 months. And I think the thing that where I'm gonna, I guess when I say go with this, I mean the practice is the practice, and I keep building the practice and doing this. I love doing this. I love to teach. I've taught in certain types of ways in the past, but there's no doubt that my goal eventually is to teach criminal justice classes, or something in that vein.
Nice.
And share this experience with other people, doing speaking engagements, and eventually teaching is where I'm ultimately taking this to. And that's why I got my master's. I mean, listen, I got my master's because I love school, I love learning, and I'm not someone who felt like, oh, I spent 18 months in prison, listen to me. I spent 18 months in prison, and I just got a master's in criminal justice. I've read about this. I know the theory behind it. I know the studies behind it. And I thought it would bring credibility to the judges and departments of corrections, the Bureau of Prison. And so, I really care about what I do. I take it very, very, very seriously. And it's given me it's given me a chance at redemption in a lot of different ways.
Well, I'm a storyteller, and I love the hope for a happy ending. And this is that. If it's one takeaway for anybody who's going through this doesn't mean your life is over. That you can get through this, and you can turn it into something meaningful and beautiful. So what you're doing is a major help to a lot of people. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And I will make you a deal that when the book is out, I will have you back on to talk about it again. So you
got a deal.
Keep me posted, all right?
I will.
So glad we were able to connect, and let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thanks, Craig.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay,
Bye.
man. Bye. That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works, I am so glad you're here, and I hope you keep listening. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off on a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.